getting the job is really job one at Alabama, and I don't think he has done that. And I'm not asking him to beat somebody he's not, but if he continues on this current path, I have serious doubt that he'll be successful.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. It has been exactly 1 year since Nick Saban retired as the Alabama head coach. Do you miss him yet? His replacement, Kalen DeBoer, just finished a tumultuous first season that saw the Crimson Tide miss the college football playoff by a whisker and apparently put the new coach on a scorching hot seat. And joining me now is the man who said that very loud and clear, ESPN and SEC Network host of the Paul Finebaum Show, the one and only Paul Finebaum. Paul! So good to have you back. Welcome back.
Ben, thank you. It's great to be on with you, but you ruined my day when you reminded me of that dark, gloomy, very sad day a year ago when Nick Saban ruined my life and many of our viewers right now.
I was in the movie theater when it happened, Paul. I was trying to decompress after the Rose Bowl. I'd just gotten back from Alabama, seeing a movie, and I get a text and I see a push alert that says Chris Lowe reports Paul Finebaum, Nick Saban has retired. I had to leave the thing and get to work. So, ruined my holiday. That guy.
Well, I was
Nick
fortunate. I was live on the air, which was really a good place to be for something like that. And I've covered, there's been far more serious stories that we've all covered that were tragic and life changing, but that one really got to me though, because I was sitting right where I am right now in our studio, and we were about to go to a break. It was kind of a fairly low key day, not much was going on, and the producers started screaming, Nick Saban, I'm like, oh. So I went off air for 1 second. I said, let's just go to a break before we, report something that we're really not sure. And it turned out we got Chris Lowe on before we came back. And there you go. The next couple hours, next couple of days, next couple of months were unlike anything we'd ever seen.
Gloomy is the right word. I went out to the Saban statue as soon as it happened, and it was like somebody had died. I think people's souls had died a little bit in Tuscaloosa because it was a cold, dark night, and it looked like they were attending a funeral. And I want to hear more about your thoughts about a year since Nick Saban retired. But as I mentioned earlier, Paul, you've made no secret about how you feel about the job that Kalen DeBoer has done so far as Nick Saban's replacement. First question, in your mind, what part of the job has Kalen DeBoer sort of fallen short in the worst?
I think understanding the stage that he's on. When he talks, I still feel like he's, at maybe one of his first couple of jobs, or even Washington, where people care, but it wasn't all that they talked about every day, 365 days a year, and it just. I realize who he is, and I like him. I've been around him a number of times, as a lot of folks in our media business, and he's likable, he's personable, probably far more than almost any coach I've dealt with. But getting the job is really job one at Alabama, and I don't think he has done that. And I'm not asking him to beat somebody he's not, but if he continues on this current path, I have serious doubt that he'll be successful.
It's probably the most unfair comparison to compare him to Nick Saban, but it's the natural one because he took his job, right? He replaced him. I've often thought about, Paul, the contrast of Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer's introductory press conferences when they were hired, right? The program was obviously in a much different place in each circumstance, but it's really night and day if you watch those videos back to back. Nick Saban comes in, he lays down the law. He says, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it my way. And that's that. He seemed to really understand the culture and the expectation in Tuscaloosa. He appreciated the tradition. He said as much. DeBoer had this much more, aw shucks, what an honor. I'm glad to be here. Nobody would confuse the two coaches for any reason. But, Paul, you just said it, he doesn't seem to get it. Is it a culture fit that's the problem?
I just think that's who he is. And I've been around long enough, as you know, Ben, to have covered the transition from Bear Bryant to Ray Perkins, and it's not the same, except but Ray Perkins played for Bear Bryant, so it was a little different. He did everything different, and some people appreciated that, some people abhorred it. But with DeBoer, it just doesn't feel real. And I realize I'm going to say this over and over again. That's his personality, but we can't escape his personality, and that may be the problem here. But Saban walked in. He had the national championship. He had that bigger than life persona, and he, at the opening press conference, he talked about how the team was going to win. Basically, force you to submit. That was his approach. We're going to be better than you. We're going to beat you we're going to beat you to death, essentially. And then what he did, even more dramatic than that, is he went on about a 2 or 3 month media intimidation tour, which you could like or not, but it was successful. And you've heard all the stories, and you may have even been in some of the meetings. But uh, by the end of winter in 2007, nobody would dare look at Saban or doubt him. That's not going to happen with DeBoer. He got a pretty quick honeymoon, and but it all went away very quickly. I mean, you think about the juxtaposition of halftime of the Georgia game to the very next Saturday night in the aftermath of Vanderbilt. I've never seen anything like that. Uh, and that's where we are. And every time you thought he was going to get out of it, so he beats, he loses to Vanderbilt, loses to Tennessee. The season's on the brink. He goes to LSU and has a monster win, and we're all talking playoff and maybe the SEC championship, and he throws it all away at Oklahoma. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like that. And so he beats Auburn, which didn't mean much to me, but it was still a win. And I was there that morning. It just felt like another game. It really didn't feel like the Iron Bowl. So you're feeling okay. He wins 9 games. He beats a terrible Michigan team in whatever the name of that bowl game is and whatever it means or stands for. And then he throws it all away again. And that is, I mean, you can't do it any worse than that. Uh, and I'm sick and tired of hearing media people. Well, he won 9 games. Who cares? It was about getting to the playoff or bust, and he busted it.
Yeah, I mean, you called the Michigan loss inept, right? Like you said that you think it could even haunt DeBoer down the road. And, as you said just now, I mean, it was playoff or bust for Alabama in 2024, and that the first season should probably be considered a failure for that reason. But, you also said while it's absurd to even talk about firing DeBoer after one season, you have used those words, right? Hot seat. Like,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think he blew it. I think Alabama blew their opportunity. They had a relatively easy path to the playoff. They could have walked in with a win against a bad Oklahoma team. They blew that, got blown out in embarrassing fashion. But I mean, maybe including that Oklahoma game and the things that you just talked about, what put him in this position when in their first seasons, coaches are afforded, a decent amount of grace, but now we're in this position using words like hot seat this early into his tenure.
It's pretty scary. I was on a program earlier this week with Joe Scarborough, who you probably know. He went to Alabama, big Alabama guy. And I realize he's a political commentator, but he literally on national television on MSNBC compared Kalen DeBoer to Mike Shula. He said we got he said in front of however many million people watch that show every morning. He said we got another Mike Shula, and I didn't argue. I mean, I don't know if he's true. I mean, I think I think fundamentally he's a good football coach. That doesn't mean anything. The SEC has about 15 or 16 top-notch football coaches, and to get ahead, you have to do more than what he did. And I'm not that optimistic that next year will be better. The schedule's tricky. Uh, I mean, he lost to Vanderbilt. He lost to a 6-loss Vanderbilt, a Vanderbilt team that lost 6 games, and it was 7-loss Oklahoma team. So I'm talking to myself here. Let's not play the schedule game in January because Alabama should have lost about 2 games last year, and they ended up beating the team I thought they'd lose to, and they still managed to screw it around. So I think the question about the quarterback: are we going to base all of our hope on Ryan Grubb coming to here as the offensive coordinator? He's twice turned down the job. He turned Nick Saban down 2 years ago. He took the job last year, then bailed out. Is that the guy you want? And is this 5-star freshman phenom the answer, even though Alabama already had the heir apparent Julian Sayin, who immediately left after I think DeBoer got his name wrong a year ago.
That's right. I remember that report. I mean, names like Mike Shula and Ray Perkins are certainly not comparisons that you want to draw with the coach that's replacing Nick Saban. Maybe it was inevitable. Who knows? And we'll find out. But you mentioned the quarterback position. I mean, so much of the criticism for Alabama was placed on the shoulders of Jalen Milroe at the end of the season. I mean, he was under the microscope. Fans wanted him gone. He's entered the draft. He is gone. And so now DeBoer is going to have to coach somebody else up. But was it as simple as Kalen DeBoer was hampered by the starting quarterback that he inherited in his first year? Or did Alabama's problems last season maybe even transcend their most important position? Frankly, a position that reflects on DeBoer as this offensive guru.
Well, listen, a year ago, Jalen Milroe was well thought of. And, in some ways, maybe he did hamper DeBoer. It was hard for DeBoer to come in and go get lost. But he knew who he was. He had seen him play, and when Milroe decided to stay, it was a big deal. I think he had to make a deal with Milroe to stay, because if Milroe had left, I think a lot of other guys would have left too. But just think about what was lost, and this is on Nick Saban, not on Jalen Milroe. But McLaughlin, the center, who nobody liked, but he turned out to win the top center, top center of the year. Caleb Downs, who was the best defensive secondary specialist in the country and a great kickoff returner, Isaiah Bond, and the aforementioned Sayin. I mean, that's a couple other guys as well, but that's a chunk. I mean, those guys, had they stayed, Alabama very likely would have been in the playoffs. That's how critical that transition was. But ultimately, it's going to be it's not going to be how DeBoer acts. It's not going to be what he says. It's going to be whether he wins enough to calm everyone down.
Paul, talking about Alabama and the athletics program, I mean, publicly, we've seen them begging fans for NIL money. We've seen them whining about missing the playoff. And, they obviously hope that things improve in year two with their big hire to replace Nick Saban. But internally at Alabama, how do you think the school and the athletics department have handled this past year?
Very poorly. I sat with Greg Byrne. I think I saw you the very same day, the week of the whatever game it was. I think the Missouri game.
That's right.
And I asked him point blank. I said, "Do you have any regrets of hiring Kalen DeBoer?" He said, "Absolutely not. We feel very comfortable." And what he ultimately did, I think, was regrettable. And I also am on the record as calling Greg Byrne the best athletic director in the country. So this isn't coming from a critic of Greg Byrne, but his handling of Alabama failing to make the playoffs, coupled with his manifesto encouraging fans to donate money a week before Christmas, were two of the worst decisions I have seen an AD make in a very long time. He didn't help himself one bit with either one, especially the second one. It's okay. I mean, by the way, once you fail to get in the playoffs, you putting out something on social media is irrelevant. But that letter about getting people to donate was about as ill-timed as anything I have seen. And maybe they hauled in a bunch of money. I have no earthly idea. But the look was really bad, and I was surprised, because I think Byrne has dialed up some incredible decisions, Nate Oates being one of them. I thought DeBoer was a good hire. No longer in that camp, but I mean, I'm not sure where I am, but Byrne is still well thought of. But he had a bad month. One of my favorite songs is from the Counting Crows called "The Long December." And it could have been written about Greg Byrne.
It's been a long December. Some bad optics there, to say the least. But let me just follow up there. You say you're no longer in that camp of thinking DeBoer was a good hire. I mean, that is how you feel. I mean, do you think that there might even be some buyer's remorse, or are you just, as somebody in the media, just watching this, observing this, somebody who's followed Alabama for a long time, you just think it might not be the right fit?
It doesn't feel that way right now, and So let's go back and think about what were the other options. It came down between DeBoer and Mike Norvell. I mean, nobody can cast their lot with Norvell after truly the most disastrous season I've ever seen a contender have. But the name that keeps being brought up by people is Lane Kiffin, because Lane Kiffin, even though he didn't make the playoffs either, he seems to get a lot out of his players, and it just feels like Kiffin never got a shot, never got a call, and I wonder. I just asked this out loud: is that something that Alabama is going to regret?
Yeah, it's a good point, to say the least. As somebody in the media, I think Lane Kiffin would have been a great hire, Paul, just for the content alone. You mentioned this earlier. You were there for the end of Bear Bryant in Tuscaloosa, so you've seen how this fan base responds to transitioning from a legendary era in the sport, let alone its own program. I mean, there was always an expectation with Nick Saban every year that Alabama would be in the conversation, that they would even hoist a trophy at the end of the year. But in those 17 years between Gene Stallings winning a championship and Saban's first title, that expectation diminished, and there were dark days in Tuscaloosa. Do you think that Alabama is potentially staring down another dry spell like that, or do you think the window is still open to compete at the top, whether it's DeBoer or somebody else?
Yeah, I think the window's open, and here I go with the 12-team playoff that Alabama missed, but it makes it so much easier. If we were still in a 4-team playoff like we were a year ago, I would be somewhat dubious, but it's not that difficult. And I think when we get to this new CFP contract, there's going to be at least four automatic qualifiers for the SEC. So it shouldn't be impossible, but you don't know because there are a lot of things out there looming, and you know after the top of the SEC, the next tier is very difficult. It's a little bit like the NFL. I mean, how many teams that made the Super Bowl a year ago, other than Kansas City? San Francisco didn't even make the tournament this year. It's hard, and you look at who's trending up and who's trending down. It's much bigger than in-state rivalry, but you have to believe that Auburn's trending up. That's, you have to. By the way, if they don't trend up in a year ago, I feel pretty confident I'll be sitting here with you talking about Auburn's new coach. So I'm being optimistic there. But I think realistically, there's so many schools that are in that next tier, like South Carolina, like Ole Miss, LSU, uh, that just make it so much more difficult for Alabama to be in the very upper echelon, like they've been for so long under Saban.
Yeah, and Paul, you went on ESPN and said you're waving the white flag, right? Like you're done stumping for Alabama as a playoff contender. But and you even have like Kirk Herbstreit going on the air and sort of like defending himself against this like narrative that like ESPN wants nothing but SEC teams in the playoff. But I mean, in Alabama's case, do you think that they've lost the benefit of the doubt in any way as it relates to the committee? The Saban discount is no longer there, obviously.
Yes, because I really, on the day of the selection, I really did believe Alabama was a tournament team. Uh, and it's always easier after the fact. So I said all that. I was, I mean, of the three SEC schools that were on the cut line, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Alabama, I felt Alabama was the best of the group. And whether they were or not, it doesn't matter. Once you lose a bowl game like that, people don't want to hear it. I mean, all of a sudden you start getting columnists going, don't you think Paul Finebaum and Kirk Herbstreit owe Indiana an apology? No, I don't care about Indiana. I mean, they weren't a worthy team, but Alabama doesn't look like one either. So last week when I did that little skit on New Year's morning, it was just basically saying I'm done giving Alabama the benefit of the doubt. So, but I think I spoke for a lot of people, and I don't think the committee cares about all that stuff. The Oklahoma game cost Alabama the bid. I talked to Rich Clark, the CFP executive director, and he as much as said that. And none of that has anything to do with next season. But I just I was really surprised in the aftermath. I happened to be, we were doing our show from Manning's restaurant in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, and just talking to people in the restaurant and hearing from people on the phone during our show. The bailout on DeBoer was over the top. You live there, and I was in Alabama the week before, and I heard for Christmas, and I heard a lot of it just on the street at coffee shops. Hey, what's with? I had somebody walk up to me at a Starbucks, and the guy said, "What's with this guy?" I mean, it wasn't like what's with Coach DeBoer. It was like this guy, as if he didn't even want to mention his name. That's not good when you're the Alabama head football coach after one season.
No, and I think that the fan base has spent the last year almost exactly trying to convince themselves this is going to work. They didn't know anything about Kalen DeBoer, didn't know who he was. They were probably Googling him, as soon as his name came up. And, it's their program, it's their beloved program. And if this is going to be the guy, then they do have to convince themselves that he's going to lead them to the promised land or back to it now that Nick Saban is gone. But on Nick Saban, Paul, how do you think he's handled his first year away from coaching? I mean, do you see his role evolving on television even more? Or do you think that there's any smoke at all to these calls for him to suddenly become commissioner of college football and solve all of its problems?
Well, let me address the commissioner of college football. There will never be a commissioner of college football. So that is a throwaway line used by coaches who just want to placate Nick Saban, which is fine. There's no reason not to kiss up to a guy who is as good as he is and has a big national platform. And the reason why there won't be a commissioner, Ben, is that the four now commissioners are not about to cede power. They hold it all, and they're not giving it to Nick Saban. I mean, there could be an advisory role, but it's not as if Nick Saban isn't consulted. He has been. I know the SEC commissioner has always talked to him, but he has nothing more to. I mean, I don't mean to diminish Saban, but it's not like he has anything new to add that hasn't already been suggested. And as far as television, I think he was significant. It's great to have a perspective of someone like that who understands the game, and I think he handled that very well. Now, it was interesting earlier this week. I had a guy call me on our talk show who asked me what Nick Saban has done for the $500,000 he is getting from the University of Alabama, and I really didn't have a response because it's not. I'm not really sure he's doing anything to earn that money.
I don't have a response either, Paul, for
I
what
mean,
it's worth.
by the way, he's entitled to whatever they give him. I mean, if they gave Nick Saban $100 million, it really wouldn't be enough for what he did for the university. But I think it shows you, though, that some people in the fan base, I'm not saying that many, are angry at anyone they can lay eyes on for what happened this year. And Saban certainly, what could he have done differently? Uh, by getting to the playoffs, he actually hurt Alabama short term because had he lost to Georgia, he probably would have announced his retirement in mid December, and they may have been able to contain some of the chaos that occurred a year ago this week.
We'll just call it a pension, that 500 grand a year,
Yeah,
I
but
guess.
again, it doesn't. I I think the guy mistakenly said, "Well, that's state money." That's not state money. That's money that the University of Alabama raises from its great fans.
Absolutely. And they keep asking for more. Paul, you mentioned your callers. You and one of your most famous callers, Legend, were profiled on the Pablo Torre Finds Out podcast. And it's an excellent listen. But, Legend had a couple of instantaneously famous calls after some of Alabama's lower points this past season. I want to know, what do his and other Alabama fans' feelings on DeBoer tell you about the greater fan base? And if you had to give one, what's your message to them about the long-term future of their beloved team?
Well, one thing I've learned from spending the better part of my career in Alabama, it doesn't matter who the coach is, the fans will support that person. Now, having said that, first year of Ray Perkins, first year of Gene Stallings, both Rocky, the first year of the three Mikes, Franchione. I have never seen a bailout like this. because fans will always support the coach, but this was really ridiculous. It was unprecedented. I'll tell you one quick story. We heard the meltdown from legend, which is now famous, but there's a guy named Brandon who I've gotten to know. He's come by the show a couple of times in Tuscaloosa. He's a pressure washer. I mean, that's what he does. On his Twitter space, he says, Brandon, whatever his last name is, the Nick Saban of pressure washers. The Monday after the Georgia game, he called in the show and he said, "Hey, I said, hey, the Nick Saban of pressure washers." He said, "The Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer of pressure washers." I go, "DeBoer has arrived." The next week after the Vanderbilt game, I repeat. I said, "Are you still the Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer?" He said, "No more." He said, "I'm the Nick Saban of pressure washers. I want nothing to do with DeBoer." So that shows you how quickly it can go, and that shows you how quickly it has gone. Now, Kalen DeBoer is not in jeopardy of losing his job, as I said, but he faces a very difficult challenge of solidifying his position, and it's all about what he does on the field, because if he doesn't have a big year next year, the pressure will intensify. And for all the scorching hot takes from people like me, he will legitimately be on the hot seat in his third year. And that's not hyperbole.
Well, Nick Saban can leave college football, but we need Paul Finebaum to stay right where he is. And you should listen to the Paul Finebaum show on ESPN Radio. Watch it on SEC Network. He's the best in the world at what he does, and you're thriving right now, Paul. Paul Finebaum, thank you so much for doing this.
Ben, it's always my pleasure to be with you and my friends in Birmingham. Thank you very, very much.
Hey, welcome back. It is a milestone moment, or at least it was exactly 1 year ago when Nick Saban retired as the head coach of Alabama after a remarkable 17-year run with 6 national championships and yada, yada, yada. You get it. You know who the guy is. But we know that you all remember where you were and what you were doing when you learned that Nick Saban had retired, when ESPN's Chris Lowe reported the news, broke it, the news that nobody wanted to hear in Tuscaloosa, certainly. But we know where we were and what we were doing at AL.com, and we wanted to share our stories. And helping us reflect are two of our best, AL.com's Michael Casagrande and Matt Stahl. Welcome, guys. Matt Stahl, let's start with you. Where were you and what were you doing when you got the news and knew instantly you had to spring into action?
Well, I had been at the football coaches, the AFCA convention in Nashville for a few days, and all the stuff I had from that was about to get completely ruined. Has never seen the light of day. But the last day of that, there's just not much going on from a reporter sense. So I was like, I'll spend the day around Nashville, see my parents. I'd just gone to a bookstore in Nashville and was pretty well parked on the interstate when, I was doing the thing you're not supposed to do and checking Twitter while driving. And there was a tweet. So said a few cuss words. I had a Saban retired story ready to go, but Michael did too, so he got his up. And then as the traffic jam continued, I pulled out my phone and I wrote the potential candidates to replace Nick Saban's story into the Notes app, and then emailed it, I think, to Michael, who got it onto the website. So it was an exciting time.
Wait, so you're sitting in a car writing a story about the retirement of Nick Saban and about who might replace him at the position while you're behind the wheel?
Yes. It wasn't. I don't think at any point during the writing of the story I was going fast in 15 miles an hour. It was just some horrendous midday Nashville traffic jam there on on I-40. But it was yes, the thing, you shouldn't do that. I don't recommend doing that. But Nick Saban doesn't retire every day, so I think that one time is the exception.
Yeah,
HR should note that not faster than 15 miles an hour. So we were never endangering our employees. Not faster than 15.
15 is probably the fastest you can drive in Nashville most of the time. It's usually bumper to bumper in my experience. But I mean, that has to be, that can't be the weirdest place you've ever had to break a story and write a story, is it? I mean, is that par for the course? Have you written stories in the car? Where's the weirdest place you've had to write a story on your phone?
That's up there. I wrote a story one time. I was interning at this little newspaper in Kentucky that sent me out to a Mennonite picnic. So I wrote a little thing about the Mennonite picnic, like on a picnic table there. That's probably up there. A ton of McDonald's parking lots, just, after high school football games. Various horse farms back when I was covering horse racing. But yeah, in the car is probably up. It's definitely the most dangerous.
So my story here, before we get to Michael's, is there's a car connection, and there's also like a weird place I've written stories before. I was at the movie. I was in a movie theater in Tuscaloosa, and one way to sort of preface all this is that we were all just returned from California, right? Like we had just covered the Rose Bowl. Alabama had just lost to Michigan in the college football playoff semifinal the last year when there were 4 teams. And so I think all of us were kind of trying to decompress, right? We were back in Alabama, you were in Tennessee, and we were just trying to get back to normal and start off-season coverage of Alabama and the, portal news and all sorts of other stuff that, we're all kind of still getting used to. But I was seeing the movie Ferrari, the Adam Driver movie, and I was just like, I just need to take a breath. It was a long trip. I just need to, I sat in the back row where I have written stories before, and I'm 30 minutes into the movie and I get a push notification on my phone. Nick Saban has retired. I check and make sure it's not BS, not fake, not a troll tweet or something. Sure enough, it's real. And I just sit there and think, I got to go. I got to leave the movie theater. I can't watch this movie. I can't, I was probably going to fall asleep during it anyway because I was so tired. But I walk out of the theater, bring my popcorn with me because I might need that later. And I know I've got to go home and get a camera and I got to go to campus. And it was cold and it was getting dark. And I just hit the road and went straight to the stadium. And I went to the Nick Saban statue where people had already begun leaving things as tribute to him. Boxes of oatmeal cream pies, Coke bottles, other random assortment of things. It quickly got away from the theme of things that Nick Saban likes or any way connected. There was a wooden mallard there left for Nick Saban, among other things. But
I'll always remember the Four Loco that was sitting there.
Well, yeah,
just
that
tempting
one we all
everybody.
Understand. Yeah, but yeah, it was quite a scene though. I mean, people use this analogy a lot. They did, especially within 24 hours after the news, that it was like a funeral. It truly was. It was somber. People were out there and it was not exciting. There were very few smiling faces. People were upset about the news because the run was over. It was arguably the greatest run in the history of college football. And people are now just out there paying respects to a bust of Nick Saban out in front of a stadium, not knowing what would come next in the chapter of Alabama football. And so that was interesting. And, we got a lot of really cool stories, talked to a lot of interesting people who had a lot to say about his retirement. But that was it for me. I was in a movie theater. I never finished Ferrari. I think it's streaming on Hulu. Maybe I'll go check it out and finally finish it. I'm a big Michael Mann fan. But Michael, you have a really interesting story here because you wrote the first story, the news story that he had retired, that Nick Saban would no longer be the coach. And you had to, again, you too had to, it was all hands on deck, but you had to get the biggest story out there quick. How did you do it? What were you doing?
Well, I did it in December. That's the trick. I mean, it was the kind of thing you always prepare for. People might not realize about the news business that a lot of obituaries, a lot of things that are written in well in advance so that we can publish things in a full form when things happen instead of having to, driving less than 15 miles an hour on Nashville traffic. So it took a couple of days in December, I remember, to write the story. And it was one of the more difficult stories to write because it was writing so definitively about something that hadn't happened yet, but was going to be a monumental moment. And I guess there were probably signs that Nick Saban was nearing that range where retirement was probable, or not probable, but possible. And at some point it was going to happen. So you might as well have something prepared. I know we had several things prepared ahead of time. So yeah, December, that's the trick to being ready in January, was having something written in December.
Yeah, but what were you doing, right? Because, you wrote it in kind of a unique way that people might not have anticipated.
Well, in terms of the day when it happened, I had just returned. I was sitting on the couch I had just returned from daycare where my then 10-month-old daughter was sick and had to come home because she was coughing and all kinds of sick. So I was resigned to the rest of the day, just hanging out with her before my wife came home because it's busy season for her work. And I was just sitting on the couch, sleeping daughter on my chest. And I got the same notification that you guys got, said a 4-letter word that begins with S, and quickly texted the wife, said, "What's going on?" I still have a screenshot of that text. Great, a great exchange, and just pretty much grabbed the laptop that was sitting next to me very quietly, without moving much, to not disturb the sleeping baby, but to just pull up the document where I'd written the lengthy Nick Saban retires story, filled in the X's, the bold X's, with his final record, his final winning percentage, final national championship count, and put it into our publishing platform. I think it had already been edited to the sense where it was ready to roll the second that we had it. So I think that story was published within minutes of the news coming out, and just slap a headline on it, get the photos, and it was out there. And spent the next, I think, 2 hours updating it, tweaking it, doing little things, all while this little angel was sleeping on my chest with no idea what was going on in the world. I took a selfie, I think, at one point with the headline and her on my chest to say, well, one day this will be pretty significant to you or in the world that you slept on my chest as the entire world changed, at least in the orbit of Alabama football.
Amazing. And she was none the wiser, and maybe she won't care when you tell her that day. It's like, well, no big deal. Who's Nick Saban, right? Like, who knows who he'll be years and years from now. But that's amazing. Did she ever wake up while you were doing that,
No.
or did you manage to let her sleep?
And probably after, in retrospect, I probably let her sleep too long, and I realized that after the fact. But it was like one of those modes where I don't know, for 48 hours, I don't know if any of us were kind of like in reality. We were all kind of in this hyper mode of you were ready for this moment. You knew this moment was coming. It has spanned my entire career here at Alabama. I came here in 2007. My first job as an intern at the Birmingham News was a week after Nick Saban got hired. And I covered the team or was a columnist or reporter ever since 2009. And all I ever knew here was Nick Saban. So it was kind of an interesting moment in all of our careers to know that this was changing. And it all goes down to preparation and being ready for that moment. Because at first it was like, oh my God, it's happening. But it's like, oh, well, good. I wrote this lengthy story. I don't know how long it was, but I wrote a pretty lengthy story in December to have it ready for when it came. And it was about a month later that the story's live.
Always have a plan, right? And you did, and it worked to perfection. I mean, you nailed it. I'm curious, Matt, you wrote the story about the candidates who could potentially replace Saban. Now, obviously, Alabama hires Kalen DeBoer just a couple of days later. Was Kalen DeBoer on that list of candidates that you had in your story?
Yeah, he was on there. I just threw together anybody who I thought could make sense for it. So yeah, it was him. Dan Lanning was on there. Mike Norvell was on there. I might have thrown Lane on there. But yeah, that was yes. Kalen DeBoer was on the list, fresh off that Washington national championship, and I think everybody in the world knew he had a contract offer on the table from them and had not taken it yet. So it made a lot of sense.
So who, though, from that list, if it was Kalen DeBoer, but fine, but who did you think it was going to be as you were writing it? Were you thinking like there's somebody on here that's a slam dunk, they're definitely hiring them? Or was it just completely up in the air, had no idea until, things started happening and it's like, oh, it's going to be Kalen DeBoer?
I think my first thought was Lanning. Just because, I don't know, he sustained it a little bit in Oregon to that point, so that made a lot of sense. But no, there wasn't anybody who of those who immediately jumped out, other than you sort of assumed it wasn't going to be Lane.
Well, yeah,
I can assure you that it was not. It was never going to be Lane. And sometimes it comes down to not who they wanted, but who wanted it back. And I have a feeling that Dan Lanning was approached, whether or not they would say Kalen DeBoer was their only guy. I mean, that's just not how these processes work. There were definitely conversations with more than just Kalen DeBoer, whether or not Greg would want you to believe that or not.
Well, last thing, Michael, take us out on this. It's been a year since Saban has retired, and we've had a year and a season of college football without him, at least on the sideline. We know what he's doing now. He's working with ESPN. He's become one of the faces and voices of college football in that role. And I think that the marks are all pretty high, and people think that he's good at it. But as somebody who's covered college football for so long, and where Saban was such a vital part of that, and so much of our coverage was centered around him, what has it been like? And I know that you're going to have a piece on AL.com soon that people can read where you're reflecting on that a little bit. But the short version of that, how have you reflected on a year without Saban as the Alabama coach?
Yeah, I think it's just been a year of new realities and recalibrations of expectations of like what college football is, what Alabama football is. It's a very different place. It feels an incredibly different place right now, in so many different ways. And not all of that is because of Nick Saban, but I think it was an important milestone, touchstone in this whole timeline of college football and the craziness of this modern era. It feels different, and Matt can attest to this more because he's there more day to day. Just the feeling in that Alabama football facility is so different. The militaristic marching orders of Nick Saban's gone, and the kinder, gentler Kalen DeBoer is there. It feels different anytime I'm around. So it's really interesting to just study where it was and where it is now, and what's better, what's worse. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and Matt, just to follow up there, I mean, you've covered Alabama for 2 seasons now with us. Your first season was with Nick Saban. Second was without him. Would you agree with Michael there? What was the contrast like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk to assistants now. Nobody has screamed at a reporter in a little bit, to my knowledge. Yeah, it's just it's a different vibe in there. And I think my view on it's gonna be a little different because by the end, I think we were getting maybe a little kinder, gentler Saban in there. Like, I mean, he didn't go off on a rant the week of the Chattanooga game in 2023, which just sort of breaks historical precedent there. But yeah, it's different. And yeah, I mean, even for him, it seems like he seems much happier on ESPN than he did as Alabama's coach. Just seems like he's chilled out a little bit,
To say the least. And I think he would admit that too. Well, Michael Casagrande, Matt Stahl, y'all did excellent work a year ago when this happened. A year later, you're still doing excellent work. Find them on AL.com. Read it. It's always great. We appreciate your time now. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts too. Subscribe to the show. Leave us a rating and review. Thanks to producers Matt Scalisi and John Hammontree. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and we'll see you next time.